Hello everyone and welcome. I'm excited to have you here today. We're about to explore how government spending and taxation decisions shape our economy, influence opportunities, and impact the financial future of every American. The presentation is titled Fiscal Policy, Shaping the Economy Through Government Action. Over the next few slides, we'll look at how these decisions drive growth, redistribute opportunities, and affect all of us. Let's get started. Let's take a closer look at what the U.S. national debt might look like in 2026, expressed as a share of the country's GDP. We're expecting the debt-to-GDP ratio to reach 100%, which means the total national debt will be roughly equal to the entire economic output of the country for that year. This ratio is a key indicator because it shows how sustainable our debt levels are relative to our economy's size. A higher ratio can signal increased financial strain and potential challenges in managing future fiscal policies. Now, to understand where this debt comes from, we need to look at the balance between what the government spends and what it collects in revenue. The gap between these two, what we call the deficit, is projected to be about $1.8 trillion for FY 2024. That shortfall adds to the overall debt, requiring us to borrow more to cover the gap. In FY 2024, the government expects to bring in around $4.9 trillion in total revenue, or federal receipts. Meanwhile, total government spending, known as federal outlays, is projected to be about $6.8 trillion. So, when we compare these figures, revenues versus outlays, it's clear that our spending exceeds what we bring in, leading to that deficit gap of $1.8 trillion. This snapshot of the federal budget highlights the ongoing challenge of balancing our nation's finances. It underscores why understanding these figures is so crucial as we think about the future fiscal health of the country and how it connects to the broader themes of economic stability and sustainability. The federal budget is essentially defined by two key measures: outlays, which are what the government spends, and receipts, which include taxes and other revenues collected. The difference between these two determines whether the government runs a surplus or a deficit. If receipts exceed outlays, that's a surplus. If outlays are higher, that's a deficit. Once Congress and the President agree on the budget, the President signs bills or a continuing resolution to enact the plan into law. After that, the chambers, meaning the House and Senate, negotiate and resolve any differences to move forward. Then, they draft the appropriations bills that specify funding for various government programs. Throughout this process, the President submits an annual budget blueprint, which lays out the administration's priorities. This is called the presidential proposal. But it's important to remember that each year, Congress and the President navigate a structured, and often contentious, process to decide how the government will collect and spend money. This entire process is like a complex dance, balancing different interests and priorities, aimed at shaping the federal budget that guides our nation's spending and fiscal health. Let's take a closer look at the recent trends in our government finances. As you can see, revenues have rarely kept pace with outlays, which means that deficit spending has become the norm rather than the exception. This persistent gap between what the government takes in and what it spends has led to some significant concerns. In fact, the current level of deficits is a threshold we haven't seen since the post-World War II era. Looking ahead, projections suggest that these deficits could grow to reach 120% of our GDP by 2036, according to Brookings' 2026 analysis. That's a substantial increase and highlights the ongoing challenge of managing our fiscal health. On the debt front, we're at a point where debt equals 100% of our GDP. This is a critical marker because it indicates that our total debt is equal to the value of all the goods and services produced in the country, an important measure of economic stability. Over the past 2 decades, spending has consistently outpaced revenues. The key drivers fueling this trend include entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare, defense spending, and pandemic-related relief efforts. All of these contribute to the widening gap between what we earn and what we spend. If we look at the recent budget history, it's clear that this trend of growing debt isn't an anomaly, it's a pattern. The outlays or government spending, as a percentage of GDP, have been increasing, while receipts, or income from taxes and other sources, haven't kept pace. This widening gap underscores the importance of addressing our fiscal trajectory to ensure long-term economic stability. The right fiscal choices can really make a difference in how an economy grows over time. It's not just about quick fixes or short-term boosts. It's about setting a foundation that can support sustained growth. When we make smart fiscal decisions, like investing in infrastructure, education, or innovation, they can actually expand the productive capacity of the economy. And what that means is, we're not just seeing benefits today, but we're also creating opportunities for future generations. This slide highlights how important it is to think long-term when it comes to fiscal policy, because those choices can shape the economic landscape for years to come. The ultimate goal here is to achieve a rightward shift of the aggregate supply curve. In simple terms, that means we're aiming to produce more output at every price level, which fuels long-term economic growth. Now, one way we do this is by expanding productive capacity. Lowering regulatory burdens is a key part of that. When regulations are less burdensome, it reduces compliance costs for businesses. That means more capital is available to invest in new projects and innovation, which ultimately boosts productivity. Deregulation also plays a crucial role. When we reduce rates or remove unnecessary rules, it creates incentives for individuals to work more hours and for businesses to invest, hire more people, and expand their operations. And let's not forget about lowering marginal tax rates. By decreasing the tax on additional income, we encourage both individuals and businesses to produce more because they get to keep a larger share of what they earn. All of these supply-side fiscal policies are designed to grow the economy by increasing its productive potential, rather than just managing demand. The focus is really on creating incentives, making it easier and more attractive for people and businesses to produce more. In essence, when we incentivize production through these policies, we set the stage for sustainable, long-term growth by shifting the supply curve outward. Today, having a large deficit means that in the future, we'll likely face higher taxes or see a reduction in public services. This is a crucial point because it shows how current financial decisions can impact generations to come. Future generations will have to bear the burdens of choices made today, even though they had no voice in those decisions. It's a question of fairness, intergenerational equity. When our government borrows money now to fund spending, it's essentially deferring the cost to those who will live in the future. Projections indicate that our debt could rise to 120% of GDP by 2036, which is a significant and mounting obligation, as noted by Brookings in 2026. This raises an important question: who ultimately pays the bill? The answer involves understanding how benefits and costs are redistributed across different generations. It's a complex issue, but at its core, it's about balancing today's needs with fairness to those who will come after us. It ties into the overall theme of responsible fiscal management and the importance of making sustainable decisions. When the economy contracts and private demand starts to falter, that's when the government steps in to help. They do this by deploying spending and tax policies aimed at stabilizing output. Essentially, they're trying to prevent the economy from spiraling downward further. The goal here is to restore confidence, both among consumers and businesses, so that economic activity can pick back up. This approach, called fiscal policy, is a key tool in fighting recessions. It's about using government resources strategically to smooth out economic fluctuations and support growth when private demand isn't enough. Throughout this presentation, we'll see how fiscal policy can be a powerful way to stabilize the economy during tough times. Expansionary fiscal policy aims to shift aggregate demand to the right, which helps increase output and employment during economic downturns. When the economy is in a slump, this kind of policy can stimulate growth by encouraging more spending and investment. It's most effective when used intentionally against the natural fluctuations of the economic cycle. For example, we spend more when private sector activity slows down, and then we can consolidate or reduce spending during periods of economic growth. This approach is known as countercyclical policy. It means acting opposite to the current phase of the business cycle. During a recession, we implement stimulus measures to boost the economy, and during booms, we tighten fiscal policy to prevent overheating. This dynamic helps smooth out the ups and downs of the business cycle, making fiscal policy a powerful tool for stabilizing the economy. Ultimately, understanding these phases, expansion, consolidation, recession, and stimulus, helps us see how fiscal policy can be strategically used to support sustainable growth. So, the shared objective here is to mitigate the decline in aggregate demand, slow the rise in unemployment, and ultimately shorten both the length and the depth of a recession. When we talk about reducing taxes, what we're doing is increasing disposable income for households, which means people have more money to spend. At the same time, lowering taxes reduces costs for businesses, making it more attractive for them to invest and expand. This combination encourages consumer spending and private investment, which are key drivers in stimulating overall demand in the economy. Now, moving on to direct government purchases, things like building roads, schools, or funding defense, these are immediate injectors of money into the economy. They create jobs and boost output right away. Similarly, transfer payments such as unemployment benefits put money directly into the hands of those who need it most, further supporting demand during tough times. Both of these strategies, tax cuts and increased government spending, are part of what we call fiscal stimulus. They work through two main channels, both aimed at injecting demand into an economy that's struggling. By doing so, they help stabilize economic activity, support employment, and ultimately guide the economy back toward growth. Let's take a closer look at how stimulus actually moves through the economy. When a dollar is spent, it doesn't just stay there. It circulates multiple times, effectively amplifying the initial boost beyond its face value. This is what we call the multiplier effect. Next, consider tax cuts. When taxes are reduced, consumers have more money in their pockets. Naturally, this leads to increased spending. As people spend more, businesses respond by hiring additional workers and expanding their production to meet the higher demand. That's the indirect impact, how the initial policy trickles through the economy and creates broader benefits. Then, there's direct government spending on goods and services. This immediately adds to the GDP, creating jobs and income directly within the sectors targeted by that spending. All of these processes, direct and indirect, work together to reinforce each other, making the overall impact of stimulus more powerful than the initial expenditure alone. This interconnected flow is key to understanding how stimulus drives economic activity, as highlighted by CRS research in 2022. The net effect of stimulus depends on the interplay of all these forces, making calibration and timing absolutely critical to policy success. When we talk about the balancing act, it's important to recognize that excess demand stimulus can actually overheat the economy. This can lead to eroding purchasing power and undermine the very recovery that the stimulus was meant to support. And then there's the issue of accelerating inflation. As rates rise, they attract foreign capital, which causes the dollar to appreciate. A stronger dollar makes U.S. exports less competitive internationally, potentially widening the trade deficit instead of narrowing it. Another key point is that increased government borrowing, while intended to stimulate, can crowd out private investment. Higher interest rates make borrowing more expensive for businesses and consumers alike, which can dampen the overall stimulus effect. All of these factors highlight that fiscal stimulus isn't without trade-offs. As the economy responds, these countervailing forces can diminish the effectiveness of the policy. So, it's really a delicate balancing act, trying to support growth without triggering negative side effects. So here we see that high existing debt really limits what the government can do in future crises. When debt levels are already high, borrowing and spending become much more difficult, especially when we need to act quickly. At the same time, the costs of servicing that debt, paying interest, are taking up a larger and larger part of the federal budget. That means less money is available for other priorities like infrastructure, education, or healthcare. And there's another concern. Markets might start demanding higher interest rates to lend us money. When that happens, borrowing becomes even more expensive, which further shrinks our fiscal space, the room we have to maneuver financially. All of these factors mean that the next time we face a serious economic shock, our window for implementing bold stimulus measures could be much narrower. We might not have the same flexibility or resources to respond effectively. Why does all of this matter? Well, the United States is now facing its next economic downturn with debt already at 100% of GDP. That's the highest peacetime level in history. That leaves us in a vulnerable position, with a weakened fiscal stance that could make shocks even harder to manage. In essence, our fiscal situation is precarious, and this vulnerability to shocks underscores the importance of addressing these debt challenges before crises hit. As we look at this final slide, I want to emphasize the gravity of the situation. With debt at 100% of GDP and still rising, the United States faces a critical balancing act. We need to carefully weigh the immediate benefits of short-term stimulus against the long-term need for fiscal sustainability. This is a challenge that will shape our economic policies for decades to come. Every fiscal decision we make has intergenerational consequences. Today's deficits create obligations for future generations, so responsible and far-sighted leadership is essential. We must be mindful of the legacy we leave behind. Now, to stabilize the economy and restore employment, expansionary fiscal tools, like spending increases and tax cuts, are vital. These measures help boost demand when the economy is contracting, providing the necessary support to prevent deeper downturns. At the same time, supply-side policies such as tax incentives and deregulation can expand productive capacity. These strategies promote lasting economic growth by encouraging innovation and efficiency. Ultimately, fiscal policy is one of the most powerful tools governments have. It shapes not just the present, but the future, affecting growth, stability, and opportunity over the long term. So, in conclusion, fiscal policy is a potent instrument with profound and lasting consequences. The choices we make today will influence generations to come, making thoughtful, strategic decision-making more important than ever.